we're gonna talk about Bernie Sanders and Cardi B having a very productive conversation about all of the issues that impact American people, from healthcare to education to police brutality, but most importantly, to wage stagnation.
What are we gonna do about wages in America? Good. Like, for example, like me as a New Yorker, not now, but when I was not famous, I just felt like no matter how many jobs I get, I wasn't able to make ends meet. Like, I wasn't able to pay my rent, get transportation, and eat.
So that's Bernie Sanders and Cardi B talking about wages in this country. They're talking about the fact that American citizens, specifically 5%, according to the latest National Bureau of Statistics, of the American labor force, having to work multiple jobs. They're also talking about the reality that minimum wage is far too low for living wages. And I thought that this was a unique conversation, especially considering that even at some points, Cardi B talks about the fact that the low unemployment numbers are not really a reasonable metric to determine whether we truly have a robust economy or we truly have a successful economy, which I thought was very interesting because a lot of people immediately, of course, hyper-focused on Cardi B being a rapper or Cardi B and her grammar or whatever. And this is important for me especially because I think that like people who have experienced being low-wage employees or people who have experienced living in economic struggle probably have a better understanding of how the economy impacts them in a negative fashion, regardless of whether or not they're able to communicate those problems in the most palatable way possible. And I want to contrast that now with an intellectual giant like Ben Shapiro, who recently had something to say about the necessity of structural change at a time when millions of Americans have to work multiple jobs to survive.
Well, the fact is that if you had to work more than one job to have a roof over your head or food on the table, you probably shouldn't have taken the job that's not paying you enough.
Yeah, of course. It's stupid to work a job that doesn't pay you well, stupid. Why don't you go find a job that pays you better, stupid? That's Ben Shapiro's entire shtick. Just essentially making fun of poor people and showing no guilt or showing no empathy towards them whatsoever. And for some weird reason, they still consider him to be this intellectual giant, right? And of course, he's propped up by wealthy oligarchs who agree with him politically, just to essentially do this all the time. But what I want to highlight here, okay, isn't the cruelty of his conversation here, isn't the cruelty of his rant here, but the second portion, because he's just also flat out wrong.
Also, it is not true that the vast majority of people in the United States are working two jobs. It just is not true. According to the census statistics, a small but steady number of American workers have more than one job because either they need extra income or because they want to gain more experience or explore different interests. There's a recently released U.S. Census Bureau report, and apparently what it found is that approximately 8.3%, this is as of 2013, so it's actually lower now, 8.3% of workers had more than one job. That was as of 2013. It's a lot lower now. So this notion that there are just tons and tons of people who are working multiple jobs, it is not really true. It's not actually the reality.
So I went and I looked at the Census Bureau report that he was talking about, that he's like minimizing the impact of right now, minimizing the reality of by saying, it's just not true. People aren't, it's not a ton of people. It's actually only 5% as opposed to 8% 3 years ago or whatever. And the report is literally titled, about 13 million US workers have more than one job. So Ben Shapiro looks at a report where the title of the report in bold font says 13 million US workers have to work more than one job. And he goes, that's a tiny percentage. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And it's ridiculous. But if you thought that it would get even worse than that, let's take a look at the last portion here where he's just flat out wrong.
In May, 5% of Americans had multiple jobs. 5%. That's really what's bringing down the unemployment rate, is those 5% of workers who have multiple jobs. Okay, for all of the talk about people working at Uber, it's held to that range actually really since 2009. It's always been a very, very low number. So this again is just a lie. It is also this bizarre idiocy that you can dictate to the economy what the economy ought to do. Every time everybody tries to dictate to the economy what it ought to do, the economy fights back because it turns out the aggregate knowledge of the market economy knows more than you do.
So there's 2 points that I want to address here. One, that Ben Shapiro's statistics suck, and we're going to get to that in a brief moment. But what's completely insane about this is the fact that we're nearing full employment with unemployment at 4%, okay? Incredibly low, which means that it's a tight labor market, which means that wages should get higher, but they still remain stagnant for some weird reason. Now, this baffles economists, which Ben Shapiro is not an economist, apparently, especially considering that he talks about the aggregate nature of the free market. Like, it's like a childish perspective to have on the economy when even economists are like, we don't know why wages are still stagnant, because according to everything that we believe, that wages are supposed to get higher. We're supposed to have better benefits. We're supposed to have a labor force that is in a stronger position to bargain right now, considering the fact that, like I mentioned, unemployment is nearing full employment, okay? So that's one issue that I wanted to just quickly go through. And obviously there's an answer for this, but it's literally everything that Ben Shapiro advocates against. It's the fact that capital has won and labor has lost. And it has happened throughout the 70s. It's an ongoing battle between capital and labor, but capital has absolutely won in like the past 4 or 5 decades when we talk about the difference between wage growth versus productivity growth. And you see that significant difference. And people like Ben Shapiro have been advocating for that kind of market correction that benefits owners of capital in the form of Supreme Court decisions like Janus, for example, or like right to work laws. Like all of these things that Ben Shapiro and others like Ben Shapiro have advocated for are technically market corrections that benefit capital. What Ben Shapiro opposes here in quite a foolish fashion is market corrections that favor labor, that favor labor over the interests of capital. That's what Ben Shapiro wants, make no mistake. Also, on top of that, his statistics suck too. So let's go to graphic 4 here. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics explanation of unemployment statistics, the current population survey administered by the Census Bureau depends on in-person or telephone interviews of people over a period of time. To include someone, it must be possible to repeatedly find the person. Now, you all know why this would be difficult, right? If people are working long hours at multiple jobs and spending time traveling between them and home, successfully scheduling an in-person interview is less likely. Poor people also move more frequently than those with higher incomes, so there is an issue of finding an accurate current address. A greater use of mobile phones rather than landlines and the lack of directories of mobile phones numbers increases the difficulty of reaching specific people. Some people moonlight, they take money under the table without it being taxed. These are all other ways that people can get compensated. They're not going to want the government to know because it's not taxable. They don't want to get taxed for it. They don't want to get in trouble. So it's unlikely. They're not going to tell someone representing any federal branch they work more than one job. Others might not want to disclose information out of general distrust of the government. And according to a Gallup poll, 36% of US workers are in the gig economy, which works out of a very large number of approximately 57 million people. 29% of all of the workers in the US have an alternative work arrangement as their primary job. This includes a quarter of all full-time workers at 24% and half of all part-time workers at 49%, including multiple job holders. 36% have a gig work arrangement in some capacity. So literally every part of Ben Shapiro's opinion is just completely false. And all he does here is vilify this perspective, vilify the poor people for being poor, just completely deny that poverty is a structural form of violence, or poverty is structural, and therefore the answers have to be market corrections enforced by the government, because he likes to play fast and loose with libertarianism. What do you think about that, Jamie?
Oh my God. I mean, do you know anyone who has a landline, first of all? Because probably the only people I know who have one are my parents.
Even my grandparents don't have landlines. Actually, as a matter of fact, my grandparents don't have a landline, and they text me all the time now. They figured out how to do it on the iPhone internationally.
Oh,
I'm getting text messages from my grandma nonstop. Like nonstop. It's probably bad. They should go back to the landlines in that respect. Just kidding. I love my grandparents. They're awesome.
Adorable.
But what do you think about just juxtapose the reaction to Cardi B talking about the fact that, the economic struggle of like having to hold multiple jobs and barely making ends meet, and people going, oh, you're a rapper, you're too wealthy, it doesn't matter, and also you're not even smart enough to address these realities. And then people hailing Ben Shapiro as an intellectual giant. The New York Times called him a gladiator of conservatism. If you guys remember that, that was awful. And thinking that Ben Shapiro is smart.
Well, I think this shows very well the kind of impossible standards that the bourgeois media has for anyone who's trying to talk about wealth inequality. I mean, this brings to mind something that Russell Brand said, who I respect very much as a political thinker and podcaster. He's kind of a cheesy actor, but that's okay. He said something like, when I was poor and I was talking about inequality, everyone said I was just jealous. And now that I'm rich and I'm talking about inequality, they call me a hypocrite. So maybe they just don't want anyone to talk about inequality.
Yeah, I love that quote. I lie to people and say that it's my quote. Just kidding, I don't do that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. It's more so about any sort of structural criticism. And what's also hilarious additionally here is that Ben Shapiro originally was criticizing Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris is like more so just a neoliberal. She does address some of the issues, but it's mostly just lip service. And even then, Ben Shapiro's like, I can't believe that this person is advocating for structural change. What are you talking about? The free market knows what's best. It's like, no, obviously not. We're back to Gilded Age levels of income and wealth inequality in this country. So obviously, deregulation and free market economics has not been necessarily too great. Let's see what Cardi B had to say about that.
And my thing is that, you know, certain people like to brag that there is more jobs now in America, but it's like, yeah, there's an increase of jobs given, but what are they paying in these jobs? They're practically paying nothing.
Like, again, Cardi B has a better understanding of stagnant wages in juxtaposition to productivity growth than someone like Ben Shapiro, who gets paid to act like he doesn't understand this reality, or gets paid to repeat talking points from the American Enterprise Institute or the Heritage Foundation virtually. But yeah,
it's possible he doesn't understand it. Like, he's not a very smart man.
I don't know. I think he probably understands it. It's pretty hard not to realize this. I feel like I think that he does understand it, but he chooses not to talk about it, and he focuses his efforts on essentially finding talking points that completely destroy this actual economic reality that we're existing under.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that the free market is this sacrosanct thing that is currently operating, and any interventions meant to improve the status of labor are some perversion of the free market, is an utter misunderstanding of how the market functions to begin with, right? Because without the intervention of the government, your money would not have value and the market would literally not exist. And one quality of this particular version of capitalism we're in right now, called neoliberalism, is there's an enormous amount of government intervention in order to keep the market functioning, growing, and doing what it is supposed to do under capitalism. So I don't know if Ben Shapiro is just willfully ignorant or stupid or just pretending he doesn't know, but it's very transparent to me.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting to consider, of course, when you realize that Ben Shapiro has had, of course, a relatively affluent upbringing and got propped up by wealthy people who have similar opinions to him. For example, when Shapiro came to Hollywood from small town Texas in the early 2000s, he worked for a bit as a talent manager and somehow ended up becoming housemates with Chuck star Zachary Levi. Life was basically getting free food and playing video games in Zach's dressing room for several years, he recalled. It was in this hostile environment at the apex of heady Obama years that Shapiro and Daily Wire executive Jeremy Boring, both budding culture warriors, were introduced by Andrew Breitbart, and Breitbart got the idea that he should start big Hollywood and give a voice to whoever in this organization and outside of it might want to speak their minds politically. Boring said, estimating that when the site was launched in 2008, about 80% of its content came from people he met through friends of Abe. He's been in the right place at the right time, and I don't think, I think he works hard, but the reality is he works hard to, benefit the interests of those who own capital.